April 1945. North Sea approaches. Waters off northeastern Scotland. The last months of the European War had become a contest of attrition, technology, and seamanship. On a late winter morning, the Kriegsmarine commissioned one of its newest Type VIIC-variant boats into service, U-1206. Built at Schichau's Danzig yard and completed in the closing year of the conflict. She carried late-war modifications intended to extend submerged endurance and operational survivability. Among those modifications was an improved sanitary system, a high-pressure toilet designed to allow use while at depth. The design promised tactical advantages, but its complexity also introduced new human and technical risks. Kapitänleutnant Karl Adolf Schlitt commanded U-1206. At 27, he represented a generation of officers elevated quickly by wartime attrition. Technically trained, resolute, and operating in a theater where error margins were minimal. The crew, young and drilled for the tasks ahead, understood the North Sea had become a heavily monitored environment. Allied air patrols, radar-equipped convoy escorts, and coastal anti-submarine units limited safe transit and increased the premium on submerged operation. In that environment, small innovations that reduced the need to surface, like a depth-capable head, seemed strategically sound. The Type VIIC platform was both familiar and austere. Measuring roughly 67.10 meters in overall length with a pressure hull of about 50.50 meters, displaced in the order of 769 tons surfaced and 871 tons submerged. Armed with 5 torpedo tubes and a conventional diesel-electric propulsion package, supercharged diesels for surface running and electric motors for submerged movement. The VIIC was the backbone of the German U-boat arm. By 1945, however, Allied mastery of ASW, anti-submarine warfare, tactics combined with radar and air patrol density, compelled U-boat commanders toward innovations that offered the scantest of advantages but demanded increased procedural discipline. Among those peripheral innovations was the high-pressure sanitary system fitted aboard some late-series U-boats. The mechanism used pressurized seawater routed through a sequence of valves and checks to evacuate waste without surfacing. In principle, it reduced the boat's exposure to radar and aircraft. In practice, the assembly required exact sequencing and familiarity. An incorrectly set valve or a hurried maintenance action could admit seawater into the vessel's interior. Practical training protocols existed, but as the war dragged on, crews were sometimes hurried into service and novices worked beneath systems they had minimal practical experience with. U-1206 left its Norwegian port for a short operational patrol in early April 1945. Records indicate the boat transited the North Sea and operated near the Scottish approaches as part of late-war operational tasking. The mission was short in scope but carried the same existential risks any U-boat faced by that stage of the war. The coastal shelf was patrolled. Radar picked up surface holes at long ranges in clear weather, and a forced surfacing could lead to immediate interception. Contemporary after-action summaries and later historical accounts placed the decisive incident on April 14, 1945, when U-1206 was forced to surface off Peterhead after a severe onboard emergency stemming from an ingress of seawater while submerged. Bleeding into the popular record are vivid and often blunt summaries. An operator turned the wrong valve. Seawater flooded the head and ran into the battery compartments. The batteries reacted and produced chlorine gas, and the boat, poisoned from within, was forced to the surface and then captured or scuttled. The core of this narrative is corroborated by multiple sources, including wartime reports and later studies. But the event resists glib reduction. The commander's official report notes an engineer was working on the head while Schlitt assisted with engine repairs. The valve sequence was misapplied. Seawater entered forward sections and flooded the batteries beneath the head. The ensuing battery reaction produced chlorine and other hazardous byproducts, rendering internal atmosphere lethal and compelling a surface order to ventilate and save lives if possible. Lead-acid batteries, the standard of mid-century submarine propulsion, contains sulfuric acid and lead plates. When seawater, which contains chlorides and other salts, contacts the acid electrolyte environment, electrochemical reactions can produce chlorine and related compounds. Chlorine is highly toxic. In a confined submarine compartment, even limited concentrations can incapacitate or kill. Standard damage control practice mandated rapid isolation of flooded compartments and emergency ventilation. In U-1206's case, the scale of the inflow and the speed of the chemical reaction left little time for full mitigation. The captain judged that the only survivable course was to surface and purge the air. Surfacing off a contested coastline carried predictable results. Allied patrol aircraft and surface craft were active in the North Sea approaches. Once U-1206 surfaced, accounts placed the position roughly 8 nautical miles east or northeast of Peterhead. Royal Navy coastal patrols detected and engaged the boat. Sources diverge slightly on attack sequence. Some emphasize that aircraft bombed the surface boat. Others that surface craft conducted harassment and interception. All concur that U-1206, damaged and unable to dive effectively, was scuttled after the crew abandoned ship to prevent capture of sensitive equipment and documents. Contemporary casualty reporting is consistent on key counts. One crew member had died of illness shortly before the incident. During the abandonment, 3 men were lost to the sea. Heavy North Sea conditions while abandoning a damaged submarine could easily overwhelm even experienced seamen. The survivors, numbering in the mid-40s, were taken prisoner by British forces. Histories compiled in the post-war period reconcile these figures across sources. The aggregate tally recognizes 4 fatalities associated with the patrol and the capture of the remaining crew. These human numbers appear in naval archives, post-war British interment records, and several modern syntheses of U-boat histories. The U-1206's wreck was surveyed decades later during industrial seabed operations. In the 1970s, surveys connected to North Sea oil field development, including pipeline works on and around the Forties field, revealed debris fields and a large wreck consistent with a Type VIIC submarine at depths of approximately 70 meters off the Scottish coast. The Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historic Monuments of Scotland, RCHMS, documented the site and offered interpretations that complicate the single-cause narrative. Physical evidence was consistent with severe internal flooding and rapid sinking, but some survey notes suggested the possibility that wreckage and seabed debris had been struck, potentially damaging hull fittings or appendages before or during the flooding sequence. Such a collision, if it occurred, could have compounded the effect of a plumbing failure and made damage control impossible. The survey did not overturn the contemporaneous explanation that a misused high-pressure toilet and battery contamination precipitated the surfacing, but added nuance to the record and reiterated the difficulty of definitive causality in wartime incidents. The sanitary systems themselves deserve technical attention. The late warheads allowed waste to be forced out against external hydrostatic pressure. They did so by routing seawater through a labyrinth of valves, strainers, and non-return fittings. Correct operation required closing internal vents, opening seawater supply lines in the correct sequence, engaging discharge pumps, and verifying that check valves were seated properly. If sequence or mechanical integrity failed, seawater could backflow. Because battery rooms were often sited beneath heads in the forward sections, backflow could lead directly to electrolyte contamination and quick chemical evolution. Naval manuals of the period, both German and Allied, warned of this hazard, and technical bulletins emphasized training and the issuance of checklists. But wartime pressures meant that protocol adherence could lapse, and design choices that reduced the need to surface nevertheless introduced new single-point failures that were unforgiving under stress. The incident's popular reception emphasized the seeming absurdity. A toilet had sunk a submarine. Readers and commentators seized the image because it distilled complex naval failure into an accessible anecdote of human error. Yet technical historians caution against a reduction that neglects the layered nature of maritime accidents. U-1206 did not sink solely because of a misturn valve. She sank because operational context, human factors, equipment complexity, and possibly seabed hazards converged. The RCHMS surveys hint that the hull may have encountered pre-existing wreckage is important here. Collision damage could have deteriorated seals or stressed hull integrity, such that a plumbing error became the decisive tipping point rather than the sole cause. In the immediate hours after surfacing, the commander weighed the options available to him. With internal atmosphere contaminated by chlorine, with aircraft or surface units likely to spot the boat, and with diving capability compromised by flooded compartments and perhaps damaged fittings, the tactical calculus favored scuttling after saving as many hands as possible. Scuttling was, in late war operational procedure, an accepted practice to prevent the capture of cryptographic materials, new equipment, or operational records. German naval crews have been ordered repeatedly to deny the Allies access to sensitive hardware whenever feasible. In the case of U-1206, scuttling charges were set, the crew abandoned ship, and the submarine sank to the seabed where she rests to this day. The human consequences of the loss are as stark as they're tragically mundane. 1 man had died before the flooding. 3 were lost in the abandonment. For the survivors taken prisoner, captivity lasted until the end of hostilities. For family members on all sides, the event was one in a long series of losses that traced the arc of 1939 to 45. In the post-war years, the story became a recurring vignette in naval histories and popular media, often retold with a blend of dark humor and technical curiosity. Academic historians, however, use the case as a cautionary exemplar. It is a reminder that accident narratives in war require careful cross-referencing among documentary evidence, survivor testimony, and material remains. Material archaeology of sunken U-boats has matured since the 1970s. Underwater surveys can now employ side-scan sonar, magnetometer sweeps, photogrammetry, and remote vehicles to document hull integrity, collapse patterns, and debris dispersal. These tools allow researchers to map wreck fields carefully and to infer sinking dynamics from the orientation and fragmentation of remains. In U-1206's case, the recorded debris field, the presence of disrupted hull plates, and the position of the wreck on the seabed supported the interpretation of a rapid sinking following severe internal flooding and the possible detonation of scuttling charges. While the archaeological data cannot speak to the exact sequence of valve manipulations, they do corroborate the general scenario of catastrophic internal flooding leading to surfacing and scuttling. Technically minded readers often ask whether modern engineering could have prevented such an accident. Designers now emphasize fail-safe interlocks, physical keying of sequences, and human-centered ergonomics that prevent a single misconceived action from opening a critical path to catastrophe. Late-war submarine plumbing systems lacked such interlocks. Human operators could physically manipulate valves in an incorrect sequence without an automatic lockout. Battery placement and compartmentalization protocols might also be designed to minimize the proximity of volatile chemical systems to potential ingress points. Yet, even today, in peacetime operations, human errors combine with environmental conditions to create accidents. The lessons of U-1206 continue to resonate in systems engineering curricula. Another dimension of the incident concerns wartime reporting and the construction of narratives after hostilities. Early press accounts, military communiques filtered through censorship and operational necessity, often simplified complex incidents. The image of a toilet malfunction was digestible and memorable. Later historians built on those accounts, sometimes adding technical correction, sometimes preserving telling details because they illuminated operational vulnerabilities. The plurality of accounts, some with more colorful phrasing than others, illustrates how historical memory is shaped between the primary record and popular recollection. Good historiography returns to primary paperwork, admiralty logs, commanders' reports, and interment records, and then layers in archaeological evidence. U-1206's case benefits from such triangulation. The command report identifies a valve error and battery flooding. Post-war surveys reveal wreckage consistent with rapid sinking, and subsequent technical analyses explain how battery seawater contact produces toxic gases. Operational lessons for commanders are clear. First, redundancy and training must accompany any system that, if misused, produces catastrophic outcomes. Second, the placement of critical systems in proximity to one another, heads above batteries, for example, should be reconsidered. Third, in contested coastal waters, the margin for error is thin. Force surfacing near enemy patrols frequently leads to capture or loss. And finally, the culture of maintenance and checklist discipline matters. Even well-designed systems can fail if human procedures erode under stress. The wreck site, discovered during industrial survey work, also highlights the intersection of modern economic activity with historical preservation. Offshore resource development in the North Sea necessitated seabed mapping and in turn revealed wartime debris fields. The recovery of U-1206 remains meant that archaeologists had a chance to study a relatively intact Type VIIC wreck. Those findings have informed both public history and technical studies, and have given researchers a chance to reconstruct the final hours of a boat that in its brief career had exemplified the late war tensions between innovation and practical seamanship. Many retellings emphasize the comic or ironic, a submarine felled by its own latrine. But irony should not obscure loss. For the men who served aboard U-1206, the events of April 1945 were visceral, immediate, and deadly. An engineer working to fix a fault, a skipper juggling engine repairs and emergent maintenance tasks, crewmen scrambling in rough seas. These are human details that bracket the technical mechanics. Sensible historiography blends these human stories with technical analysis to avoid both trivialization and sterile abstraction. In closure, U-1206 stands as a localized yet illustrative case study in wartime systems failure. It reveals how incremental improvements can introduce new failure modes, how human training interacts with mechanical complexity, and how the sea amplifies small mistakes into existential threats. The post-war discovery of the wreck validated the broad contours of the original reports while reminding researchers that the material record rarely offers absolute certainty about sequence. For historians, engineers, and naval officers, the sinking remains instructive. Attention to human factors, robust training, and design redundancy can turn marginal advantages into durable survivability. And conversely, neglect of such principles can magnify the consequences of the smallest mishaps into full-scale loss.